Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Purpose Tune podcast. The goal of my show is to create valuable content to broaden your knowledge, inspire you to act, and get you in the right mindset so you can apply it in your own life to drive impact, generate meaning, and achieve your purpose. Now, today's episode's guest is Dan Norenberg. Dan is a global CEO, coach, executive team consultant, and author working in over 26 countries. He advises and coaches C-level leaders, enabling them to build highly cohesive, effective, and purposeful leadership teams. Dan has worked with over 150 executive and strategic leadership teams and is the author of Executive Ownershift, Creating Highly Effective Leadership Teams. Moreover, he founded and led a seven-figure boutique coaching and training company for many, many years, and now helps leadership teams play at their very best by putting purpose before profit. Dan, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Kong, it's a pleasure to be with you today, and thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, I am as well too. So let's dig in a little bit into your background. So how did you get involved in this type of work?
Well, there's two answers to that. Let me give you a little bit of the backstory. So I'm originally from the Midwest. I studied psychology and criminology, thought I wanted to be a lawyer. But before going to law school, I thought perhaps 1 year in business would be really, really helpful. So I left Iowa, went to California, got into a place which they now call Silicon Valley, and got sort of bit by the tech bug. I wasn't an engineer, so I worked more in sales and marketing roles with two really high growth companies, which meant that I was able to, let's say, advance in those companies, move into leadership roles very, very soon. And I found that I just loved it. I loved working in sales, helping identify needs, getting people what they want, and helping the companies profit. I thought I'd be there forever, life on the beach sort of thing. And the second company I worked with was in photovoltaics. And so we were sort of changing the world, creating clean energy at a time when renewable energy was not even on the map yet. This was a long time ago. And unfortunately, the company didn't make it. It was just an idea before its time. And so when that company went out of business, I sold my house. I wasn't married, no kids, no job, and I thought I'd go to Europe for 9 days. And then I went to Europe just for a 9-day holiday. 30 years later, I'm still here. So that's kind of the sort of the life story very quickly. So for some of your listeners that are trying to plan out their life, I can tell you, never in my wildest dreams that I think that I would be, living in Munich, Germany, after growing up in a small farm town outside of Des Moines, Iowa.
That is so incredible. So I can relate in that I also came from the Midwest, and I wanted to expand my horizon. And so my job took me out to San Francisco, and it was such an eye-opening experience. You mentioning about Silicon Valley and the tech space, it was such a great opportunity to really connect with a different part of the world, really. I mean, yes, it's still within the States, but there are different pockets. There are different United States within United States, and it's just the amount of just culture and diversity and differences that have made San Francisco and Silicon Valley what it is. It's just an eye-opening experience for a small town guy. And so
well, you're right. And I think you came from Minnesota and I'm from Iowa. So we were sort of neighbors out there. And it's a great place to grow up. And I love the Midwest. It just gave me a lot of, values and a moral compass and things like that. But then coming to California, it was just, and I sort of split my time between San Francisco and LA. And when people found out I was from the Midwest, they said, oh, it's great to see somebody from the Midwest here. We know we can trust you. So evidently there's some values there that us Midwesterners carry with us no matter where we go.
Right, exactly. And, I think that, because we come from different parts of the country, it does make it unique when we're out branching, living in different parts of the world and getting to see that side of it. I really do encourage people to just travel the world and expand your horizon. And I'm so grateful to connect with someone who has the courage to go out of his comfort zone and do something with his life, and has stick to it. So,
let me pick up on that second part of that question, because I sort of like gave the life history, but there's something else that could be interesting for the folks that are listening, because when I came to Germany, I was just, backpacking through, and I sort of had this epiphany that I thought, I can go back to California, get another job, get married, 2 kids, 2 cars, the whole 9 yards. But I thought, when I stood towards the latter part of my life, I thought, as I look back at my life and I see myself, then I was in my just early 30s. And I thought, will I regret that I didn't spend more time in Europe, when I was back in the States? So that was such a forceful dream that I had that I just elected to stay, in Europe and come to Munich. And I didn't speak a word of German. I didn't know one single person, and I didn't have any work papers. So I know a lot of your listeners have probably had far tougher times than me, but for me, that was quite a unique experience. But what I wanted to share is, you said, how did I get started in this business? I mean, what I did when I landed in Munich, I started pursuing the typical sort of sales and marketing roles because that's what I knew best. And with German companies doing business in America and American companies doing business in Germany. But what I also saw was that I always had a training and coaching function in my line management role, as many people do in the US. And I always enjoyed that. And when I looked at the German market, what I saw was, I saw that there were a lot of language schools, because, Germany is a sort of export oriented business, and they had a lot of language schools that were teaching English, and they had a lot of very academic, theoretical type management training companies in German. But what I didn't see was a real pragmatic, action-driven training approach in English for the global players, for Germans that had to work overseas. And that I seized that niche. And so I just went after that. So I developed a lot of ideas around and concepts and methodologies around helping business professionals negotiate, sell, communicate, lead meetings, and lead others, in English. So it wasn't language training, but it wasn't the theoretical academic type stuff. And it really hit home. And we landed some really big clients like, BMW and Siemens and European Patent Office. So the long story short is, when you're looking for an opportunity, I find that it's best what I did was think, what am I good at? And what do I love doing, and where's the market need? When those 3 things intersect, then you've got an opportunity.
Yeah, that's great. So how does purpose tie into all of this that you're doing? When you traveled to Germany, was that kind of like your start of finding your own calling, or did it, did you discover that later down the road? Like at what stage did that came to be for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, purpose for me is the fabric of life. It's what adds flavor to life, and purpose is the reason that I do anything. It's the reason that I exist. Purpose is sort of beyond me. It's sort of beyond now. And I'd like to think that I've always been purpose driven or principle driven. I was always attracted. I studied psychology and criminology. I spent time working in prisons, Anamosa Reformatory, with my professors, because I felt that the criminal justice system in America was tainted and didn't offer the same opportunities to everyone that got caught in that system. So that was at an early age. I wanted to be a lawyer because I thought then I could help sort of, make corrections in that criminal justice. And I ended up in business, but I still wanted to behave and act in a very purposeful way. I always believed that the companies that I was a part of were fulfilling some higher purpose. So that was always something that was really, really important for me. And then being in Europe was, sort of a clean slate. You could call it working on a green field, and spending a lot of time just walking and thinking, what's really important to me. I didn't, it's just something you just got to look for and put it out there and ask yourself questions. So, and of course, the work I do now, I think helping people be the best version of themselves is a meaningful purpose for me. For some people, it's being a doctor or a kindergarten teacher or a social worker or scientist who's working on some medicine. So everybody's got their own individual definition of purpose. But for me, helping leaders and leadership teams be the best version of themselves is a very meaningful purpose. So I have absolutely no problem getting up in the morning, And to be honest with you, I don't know if I want my clients to hear this, but I don't even feel like I'm working, quite frankly, Kong.
Well, that is actually, it sounds just what a purpose-driven person would say. It's, finding something. Steve Jobs, like one of his, he did a commencement speech at a university and said, you must find what you love and wake up and do it every day. It doesn't feel like it's a job, but something that you love doing, right?
Yeah.
That ties into what you were just saying a second ago. And I think
on that, if I could just jump in on that, you're right. And what I would say though, there's a price to pay for a purposeful life, right? I mean, if you go through life and things are pretty smooth and you're in the groove, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you want to be part of that status quo, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's not for me to judge. But if you're looking for meaning, if you're looking to find your higher calling, there's a price to pay. I can tell you, when I was sitting in Germany at the age of 32, subletting a room in a dormitory with college kids with really no financial means, and your friends back home are working the corporate jobs, with 2 cars and four flat screen TVs and already buying their lake house, you sort of ask yourself, gosh, have you gone mad? But I stayed my course, and and then found my purpose. So I think what we need to remember when we're looking like what's the higher purpose for me, what's meaning for me, that there's a price to pay for that. But I would say that stress and uncertainty and even failure is a privilege. Pressure is a privilege. And so we need to recognize that when we're in hard times or in difficult times, that's a privilege. And that's part of a purposeful life, I would say.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, to your point about there's a price to pay for being purpose-driven or living a purposeful life. I think to add on to that, there's a price to pay for not living a purposeful and purpose-driven life too, right? But I'd rather side with the living a life of purpose and meaning, because that brings me more joy and more happiness in all of my relationships. And I think there's even probably some research out there that supports this, that people who are purpose-driven, have more meaning in their life. They tend to live longer and know how to manage stress and anxiety better, because they have this core element that's driving them to be greater than who they are.
Yeah. And, you're absolutely right. That's spot on. And that's a good thing to look at. I do think purposeful living leads to longevity and certainly happiness and things like that. I was very fortunate. I say that now, but I had quite a traumatic experience when I was in college. Being from the Midwest, it's education and sports, family, church, and farming. That's what life's about. And I got really into athletics and sports and particularly American football. And I was a quarterback from the time I could even throw a football all through junior leagues and junior high and high school. And it was reasonably good, for, let's say, small farm town in Iowa and all state, and received some scholarship offers to go to small colleges. And I had decided that I wanted to go to the University of Northern Iowa. That's where my father played football. They were building a stadium there, an indoor stadium, and what winters are like in the Midwest. So I'm thinking, I'm going to play in this indoor stadium. And, I went to University of Northern Iowa, and I realized soon after I got there on the football team that I was no longer the small town big star. There were people from California and Florida and New York and all the best talent. They had a really great football program, and I was no longer really the top dog, which meant I couldn't even play quarterback. They had guys that could throw a ball 80 yards. So I went over and played defensive back, and I wasn't really playing as much as I thought I should be playing. And it really got to my ego. And I remember even going into my junior year, I said, if I'm not playing by the second game, it was a nationally televised game, I'm going to quit. Mm-hmm. And that game came and it went, and I didn't play, and I turned my gear in and I quit. And the coach was trying to talk me out. I said, no, it's being principled. I'm going to quit this football team. And something, Kong, that decision haunted me for probably 10 years. I used to wake up at night, thinking I was saving the team, being the hero, but it was over. It was like 10 years and I wasn't even on the team because I quit the team. And it was such a regret. And this is the point that I wanted to make, is that this advantage I have now, I had a taste of regret that was with me for 10 years. And so for me, as I went forward in life, and one of the reasons I stayed in Europe was because I didn't want to regret it. I didn't want to regret going back to the States thinking, what could life have been if I maybe stayed for a few more weeks, learned a little German? And so the advantage that I have now is I've had a bad taste for regret, and I don't want to have anything in my life that I regret. So regarding my relationships and my family and my work, I always think, how do I need to show up so that 5 years from now, I don't regret this or miss taking an opportunity? So maybe a little side note there, but I think that we can use regret. It's nothing to be shamed about, but how can I use that? If I'm in an important situation, I'm thinking, so I can go this way, or I can go that way. 5 years from now, what am I going to look back and regret? Is it something about a job, or is it something about going back, getting a master's degree, or is it doing something purposeful that maybe doesn't offer the big salary, but I know that's the right thing to do? So I think we can use regret to help shape and define our purpose compass, if you will.
Yeah, I love that idea. And I think that we should. There's a lot of people that often do regret on the actions they could have taken, like the whole should have, could have, like done this or done that. And I think, what this podcast is really about is to inspire people to tap into their own space and live great.
Yeah.
To really define what is it that they want with their life, the things that bring them joy, and acquire the skills and mindset necessary to get them there, whether that is to build their own company or to, I don't know, build a dream house or whatnot. Like, purpose is different for everyone, and there's no right or wrong way of getting there to a purpose-driven life. But we should be mindful of our actions and be intentful with the things that we want in our life, so that we can live life to the fullest and not have any regrets. And if that is to use our past experiences to, motivate us to get to a place that we can feel better and be better, then more power to us, right? And so I think that is a really good strategy that people can implement.
Well, you shared some good things there. That's really thoughtful, the way that you process that and the way that you communicate that. And obviously, regret is something that's happened in the past, and we cannot change the past. So we can't, live a regretful life or fear that we're going to have more regret, but we can learn from it. We can just learn from it. Say, what did I learn from this situation that I want to do something differently next time? And I think that probably as we go through life, we'll all have some regrets from time to time, but we just learn from them and we leverage them, we pivot from them. And, we don't beat ourselves up about it. That's one thing I've learned. We don't beat ourselves up over something that's happened in the past. It's gone, and we can only live today and sort of plan for the future. So I'm with you on that.
Yeah, I mean, there's 3 stages to life, right? There's the past, the present, and the future. And I think, to your point, we need to focus on the future and not focus too much on the past. I mean, we can leverage the past to apply, and we can look at our past experiences and apply those experiences to the future, so that we can not make the same mistakes. But we have to move forward, because that's what life is a process of progression, process of moving forward. And also, I'd like to know what your take is on living the present moment and how that ties into perhaps happiness or joy.
Yeah, great. And I want to say something about that. I'm just going to come back to one thing you said, which I thought was really good, the way you segmented those temporal stages there. Because when we think about the past, the part of our cognitive power that we're using is our memory, right? And sometimes that's positive, sometimes that's negative, But so when we're using our memory, we're thinking about something from the past. When we're in the present, then we're using our perception. You know, how do we perceive? What are the filters that we use to perceive what's going on? And when we're thinking about the future, then we're using our imagination. And my perception is, and I'll put myself in the first person here, I find that at times, earlier on in my life, I spent probably too much time in the past, you know, being memory driven, which wasn't always putting me in the right place. And what I've now learned later in life, thank goodness, is that the only place where you can really be satisfied, or at least for me, where I can really feel really in the groove, is in the present moment, you know, because if I'm thinking about the past, I might regret something. I think about the future, I might worry about something, but it's really the present moment. And so just to be really deliberate, I think being in Europe has sort of helped me with that a little bit. You know, you can't shop on Sunday here. You can't cut your grass on Sunday. It's people are out walking around. So yeah, I find that maybe there was a meaning of fate that brought me to Europe, that there are just times you just got to walk around and think, and there's nothing else to do but look at a tree or look at a stream, and that keeps me in the present moment. And then when I do want to go to the future, to create something, to do something purposeful, then I want to really tap into my imagination and not get caught by, say, let me say, memory anchors, if you will.
Yeah, that is so awesome. You know, about how not cutting grass or shopping on Sunday really does keep you, you know, centered and focused on the present moment. And that's where I think meditation comes in too, right? Like, I don't know if you do meditation, but I do. And that's really helped me in terms of finding clarity and, you know, planning my future. And I think that those moments need to be had for folks that are on purpose, you know, want to be purposeful, want to change not only their lives, but the lives of others. And so, you know, I know that you have your set of clients that you've worked with. Now, I'd love to have your take on like the type of work that you do with your clients. I know it's in the leadership development space. Could you tell us more about how you've worked with them and what have been some of the impact as a result of your work?
Yeah, I think there's two parts of that story, if I may. I mean, one is I mentioned earlier that I sort of founded that leadership boutique that focused on very pragmatic, action-driven leadership development for people working internationally. And we had some really blue chip clients. And I was doing that. I had a team of 15 consultants based in Munich and following some of the big global leaders around Europe, primarily in the area of talent management. So first-time leader up to strategic leader. And this was really, you know, great work. We had great consultants, great projects. And it was during that time, and I ran that company for 25 years, but it was during that time that from time to time, someone would come to me, either the senior vice president of HR or maybe the executive assistant to the CEO's office, and say, hey, Dan, we see the kind of work you're doing with our talent management groups and the results they're getting. Actually, our executive team is having some challenges, and I was wondering if you would be willing to work with them, see if you can give them some insights or some help. And I was very flattered and said, well, yeah, I'd be happy to. I'd be happy to go into the C-suite and work with that CEO and his or her team, or it could be a strategic leadership team. I'd be happy to. And then they'd always put their hand on my elbow and say, well, don't get your hopes up too high. You'll be the fourth consultant they've worked with in the last 12 months. So, you know, I knew there was a certain sort of a high rejection rate there. And so that was sort of my invitation into the C-suite. I didn't come from business school. I didn't come from one of the big classic consulting companies. I was sort of invited in from the work I was doing with talents in their organization. And when I moved into the C-suite, what I saw was that, you know, hugely talented men and women, a huge amount of intellectual firepower, very ambitious, very goal-oriented, and yet as a leadership team, as an organizational unit, they didn't function very well. They didn't communicate very effectively with each other. They didn't have real clear roles and responsibilities. They could create a strategy, but they weren't always able to sort of follow it through so it had meaning and purpose for people in the organization. And I started working with leadership teams in that way. And that became sort of my side job, as well as running the boutique that I was doing. And after a number of years, I realized that I'd come to a fork in the road. Said, so what is the next 10 years in your life going to look like, Dan? And I thought, well, I can continue to run the boutique, 7 figures, nice for the consultants and for me and for the clients, and was providing a lifestyle for our family. Or I thought, no, I can begin and dedicate more time and effort to my individual work with leadership teams. And so I sort of disconnected myself from the Learning Boutique, which I had started, founded. Several people wanted to buy it, but I said no, because then they wanted me to stay for 5 years. And so my work today is based on, that initial invitation into the C-suite. So what I do now is to work with leadership teams. I also do individual coaching, but my focus of my work is working with leadership teams as an organizational unit to help them play at their best. Because in my view, there's a lot of good leadership development work out there, but so much of it is based on the individual. We're taking an individual out for coaching. We're sending an individual off to a training and development program. And what I've seen is that we shouldn't take individuals out and train players. We should be coaching entire teams. And that's the nature of my work today. And we can continue to, explore that. It's very rewarding.
Yeah. I mean, I think that to be able to work with individuals who sit in such a high position, I think it's rewarding work because they have so much impact throughout the organization. And when you can get them to change their behavior, that changes the trajectory of where their organization is going. And so that's where the impact is. Of course,
and the teams, of course, help that. Sorry for jumping in, but the team construct, I mean, even the best coach in the world, if you're coaching an individual and they go back into their environment, you don't often see what they're doing. And that lesson came to me very clearly during my university, during my study days, because I mentioned earlier, I was working with my professors. We were taking young criminals into prisons, and in a program called Scared Straight. And the idea was to take young people in who were maybe, robbing stores or carrying a gun or stealing cars, in where they were meeting with convicted murderers, rapists, bank robbers who were in there for life. And it was sort of a discussion. It was a heavy conversation. And these hardened criminals were saying, hey, you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to end up in this life. So it was really quite a profound therapy, if you will. And what we saw through that work was those kids, those young criminals, let's say, that we could place in foster homes after that experience, they pretty much led a straight life. But those that even when they said, hey, we're never going to do something like that again, if they went back to their old neighborhood, where they didn't know their mother or their father and there were gangs around, they were soon back to their old behavior. So the environment is so strong. And if we take individual leaders and train or coach them, but put them back into the team or system that they were in without those people getting training, very little stays. So that's why I think it's really, really important that if I'm working on a behavioral change like you just described, and my teammates are doing the same thing, we can hold ourselves accountable. That's how teams become great, by holding each other accountable to a new standard of behavior that you were mentioning. So, yeah.
Right. And also the shared intellectual power that comes out of teams. Effective teams, there's just a lot about the things they can do to change the organization when you have, that much energy. I think it's one thing to coach individual leaders to become an effective leader, and another thing to coach teams of people.
Well, it's a great point, and we know that, and you just described that so well. We know how important good teamwork is to organizational success. Right. And what I discovered is that there are good teamwork elements in the lower parts of the organization, but when you move to the top of the organization, those top teams don't really get the support they need to play at their best. Mm-hmm. I mean, only 1 out of 5 executives think they're part of a highly effective leadership team. 70% of executives feel that the leadership team that they're a part of doesn't really add any value to what they do. And only 1 in 3 executives feel they can challenge something in their leadership team. So at the very top, there's a lot of power. They have a lot of things on their dashboard. They don't often get real authentic feedback because they don't have external people, telling them what is really going on as opposed to just telling them what they want to hear. So I think that's what my clients appreciate from my work. I don't always say things that people like, but I just say what I see. And what I see and what I say is sometimes not very pleasant, but people will say like, hey, I really appreciate that. I haven't had that kind of feedback in 3 years. And then they can start to work with that. So I think that change and transformation starts at the top of the organization, not the bottom. And I think leadership, the next big thing in leadership development is going to be these teams of leader construct that we're talking about right now.
Yeah. And, I think being on purpose really ties it into this notion of being authentic. And you talk about like sharing just like honest feedback with your team, with the team service clients that you work with. That is just something that we need more of in the leadership space. You mentioned earlier about how people often just want to say things kind of like kissing someone's rear end, right?
Yeah.
But when you're coming from a purposeful place, what you're doing is you're being authentic. You're providing these genuine, honest conversations for people to engage with.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point. You hit two things really on the head there. You described them very, very clearly. And with my experiences now with 150 leadership teams, that's over, I think that's 12 or 1,300 executive or strategic leaders. And you watch these teams, you observe these teams, you advise these teams, and two things that you just mentioned are very, very clear. What separates these really highly effective leadership teams from those that are just getting by. One is what I call resilient relationships. This means, do you have resilient relationships? And this means, do I give and take feedback from other members? Can I critique another member of the team? Am I willing to be critiqued? Do we have those really hard, tough conversations? If you don't have resilient relationships, you can't give that kind of feedback, nor can you really talk critically about strategy, which is also important at the executive level. That's number one. And the second characteristic, which is also a separator or a distinction between highly effective leadership teams and those that just get by, is what I called purposeful practices. And purposeful practices is about, what is the purpose of this team? Do you have an explicit purpose that describes what this team does? It's really, really important. Those really high-performing teams, they have an explicit statement or mantra, if you will, that describes what they do, number one. Number two, they're able to describe their unique contribution to the organization. They know what they do and they know what they don't do. So many times at senior leadership levels, people will drop down into parts of the organization to fix something. Well, it's confusing the others because they think, well, isn't that my job? So it's about having a clear purpose. It's about defining our unique contribution. And thirdly, it's about having what I call standards of excellence. Does the leadership team have explicit rules about that govern their behavior, how they give feedback, how they communicate with each other, and how they make decisions? And so you just named that, and so you're already far ahead of the curve than most people. So resilient relationships and purposeful practices are key to highly effective teams.
So what inspired you to do this work?
I think that first of all, I love developing people. And I just think it's developing people helps me develop myself. And then looking at the leadership teams, I just felt that after working in the middle of the organization for so long, it's just a shame. And I think that we all deserve to have high quality leadership, and people deserve to lead at their best. And I felt the best way that I could do that was to work at the top of the organization, not the middle or the bottom of the organization, and to do it in a team construct. When I'm able to enable a team to look at themselves critically, to set up a process for continuous improvement, not only does the leadership team improve, but that cascades out on others in the organization and sets an example. So it's very, very inspiring work,
Mm-hmm. So earlier you mentioned about emotional resilience, and I thought about emotional what is it? Was it
Intelligence?
something?
Well, I was talking about resilient relationships.
Yeah, relationship. And so that got me thinking about emotional resilience. Now, does that tie into emotional resilience? And what's your thought on EQ? How does that play into leadership?
Emotional resilience or emotional competence?
So you mentioned about was it a program or a concept? It was resilience leadership, or
resilient relationships. That is the ability to have these
so
really
resilient relationship was a leadership practice that you use with your clients, right? So how does that tie into emotional resilience, which is a little bit different?
Yeah, well, I mean, this resilience has to do with being able to bounce back. To what degree can I reshape myself back in my original form? You know, what is my lag time between being disappointed or surprised or frustrated? And so I think that it's that ability to, you know, first of all, with resilient relationships, that ability to have that ongoing feedback with colleagues and recognizing that people are going to see me perhaps differently than I see myself, right? And this ability to, so this idea about this emotional resilience is about understanding, I think, what I would call the difference between, in German, we would say Selbstbild and Fremdbild, how I see myself and how others see me. So, for example, if somebody came up to me and said, "Gosh, Dan, you're really you're really not listening to others, and you're really doing things that are too very self-centered." You know, if I didn't have emotional resilience, for example, I might just say my view is like, "No, I think I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread." But by having perhaps a parallel universe there or some resilience, I might say, "Well, let me take that feedback in. Let me see if I have any of the data points that sort of match up on that." So I think it is an important point, and it's all about perception and using our perceptions, but also using the perceptions of others to help us guide a purposeful life.
Right. Have you heard of this concept of decency quotient?
No.
So it goes a step further from emotional resilience, and it's basically, you know, for example, if you're a leader and you have direct reports, and your direct reports during the one-on-ones had share, you know, very positive news about, you know, just projects that they were working on, and then as a leader, you say, okay, so that's great, but tell me about some of the things that are not so great. And then, you know, they're like, well, I don't know if I could trust my boss, but I guess if she's inviting me to this conversation, I might as well. And so they may share like one or two things that they stumble across while they were working on this project, even though the execution and the result was stellar and outstanding. There were some there were some obstacles there. The boss uses that, and those obstacles and take it as a way to sort of label their direct reports as, oh, they're bad direct report. And so she will then write up an HR report, say, look, you know, this direct report is having some challenges, they're not performing well, when the truth is that, you know, it's the complete opposite. And so the leader, the boss, has enough emotional intelligence to sense out, their direct reports, let's say, emotional state, and also get them to share more of who they are. But then the decency quotient comes in is when she may rate high in emotional intelligence, but may rate low in decency quotient, because she used that to some of those I guess, few obstacles as a way to sort of label her direct reports as a bad employee to get them fired for whatever reason, right?
Well, thanks for sharing that, because I'm not familiar with that terminology. I mean, for me, I would unpack that slightly differently, because I don't know that terminology, but thanks for sharing that. For me, I would go back to, what is the purpose of leadership? What is the purpose of leadership? And there's only three things. The purpose of leadership is to engage others. That is to enable those that are around me to really play at their best. Yeah.
Right.
Number two is to lead meaningful change. And number three is to create results, right? I mean, I have to create results for the organization. Now, if I create results for the organization by not enabling my team to be effective or feel good or make contributions, I'm not really a purposeful leader. I'm not really leading in a way that's very effective. So I've got to be thinking about, how do I engage others, number one? How do I lead meaningful change? And how do I create results? That's fundamental to the purpose of leadership, number one. Number two is that if I'm a leader or I'm working with a leader and they say to me, well, my people aren't sharing, problems with me. I don't know where the problems are, which happens from time to time at the executive level. I mean, there's an issue of trust. So we have to ask the leader, or it might even be observations, making an observations. How do you respond when people share a problem with you? If you're all over it and you're critical and you're attacking, you're not going to be very successful. So this person that you just described about finding something to write up in a bad way, this is a short track leadership career. This person is, I can promise, this leader will be unhappy as he or she goes through life, and they will not be, with any one organization for a very long time.
Right. And you mentioned about what does leadership mean? It means to inspire people to perform at their best so that, these individuals could achieve the kinds of outcomes or results for the organization. And it's really about inspiration, but you'd be surprised. And I know, this, within organizations, how toxic some of these leaders can be. I'm sure, for example, Hollywood, there's probably a lot of those folks where, they would, pretend to be, a leader that inspire and support, but really they're not living to that, that inspiration. And so that's where good leadership, that's where good leadership, comes in, is to really get people to change their behavior and mindset, so that it's not about them, it's not about themselves, but more about the organization as a whole. And so I think, as you're coaching leaders, and you probably have these types of conversations. I certainly have, where it's like, what's the intent of us having this conversation? Like, where's this going? Like, is this, do you have certain ego that's getting in the way of trying to achieve a goal? Is it more about yourself, or is it more about your team and the organization? And I think when you're a purpose-driven leader, it's more than yourself. It's about your team, setting them up for success, and it's also about the organization, and helping them grow and scale. And then if you want to go a step further, is how do you serve your clients, through your products and services, and how does your organization continue to show up in the community, to provide the types of resources that could help the community grow as well. And so I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or if I'm just rambling.
Well, no, that's a good point, which you shared. You made a reference to a toxic leader in an organization, and and it reminded me of a situation that I'm in quite often, where I just did a little video clip on this as well, just to share this back. But I'm often asked to come in, and I'm asked maybe by, let's say, senior head of HR or head of technology or something, to work with a leader whose behavior is not really in line with the organizational values. And so let's say they're a brilliant person. They have a lot of intellectual firepower, but their behavior is not one. Let's say their behavior is one that's contributing to a toxic environment, and it's threatening the workforce or something like that. And the first question that I ask is, so how did this person respond when you mention to them that their behavior is not, in line with the organizational values? And there's always sort of people looking in one way, or they're looking over the wall and say, well, we really haven't talked to the person yet. And I'll say, well, if I look at this person's performance appraisal, how is it described, in their performance appraisal, this behavior that you're talking about? And they'll often say, well, Dan, you'd have to read between the lines to see that, because in our company culture, we really don't describe things so directly. And this is a real shame. People, especially leaders, they deserve to hear how others experience them as a leader. Leaders need to be forthcoming and need to be open to this feedback that they get, because if I don't get feedback about how others experience me, then how can I make any adjustments? And so I think this is really, really important. So those are the first two questions I always ask when I'm asked to come in and coach in this so-called toxic situation that you just described. Is like, A, how did the person respond when you talk to them about that? Often they haven't said anything. Or B, how did it show up in their performance appraisal? If we're not calling it out and actually writing it down, then we're actually condoning that behavior. So, but most people I find, they want to do a good job, and sometimes we're just not aware that some of the behaviors that we're using are triggering others in a way that's different than we intend. And that's why these feedback exchanges are really, really important.
Right. Yeah, that's great. All good points there. I'm sure you've been through a lot of challenging times, either through building your own company or your entrepreneurial journey or working with tough clients. How do you push yourself through those difficult times? Like what helps motivate you to continue working with these clients, or if not, what's your standard? How do you push through these challenging times?
Well, we touched on that just briefly earlier, but when you're working with senior leadership teams, I mean, their agenda and their dashboard is just difficult. I mean, that's why they're in those senior roles, to help create cultures of ownership and to develop a sensible strategy and to lead the company into the future and to identify markets so they remain interesting. So I think difficult times are a part of my client's life, and it's certainly it's just something that it's part of the game. It's part of the parcel. And I think that difficult times, challenging times, I just look at it like it's a privilege. Because if they're not having a difficult time, they probably don't need someone like me.
Yeah. Well, there's more business, for you too, right? So there's that too. So it's a good thing. But if they're not having these challenging times, then they're not also growing as well, right? Like you have to have challenging moments in order to grow as a leader. And so, and I think that's what being on purpose really is too, is, are you challenging yourself? Are you growing? And if not, what are some of the resources you could tap into in order to continue evolving as a human being, not just a professional level, but on a personal level as well. It looks like you had a thought there.
No, I was just soaking in what you were saying. So, no, I think difficult times are just part and parcel, and it's just about putting one step in front of the other. And if I don't have a solution for something today, then it'll come tomorrow. But I sort of try to embrace those difficult times. And see, I'm a believer that my belief is that, let's say, take, for example, the teams that I work with. I believe that leadership teams are capable of creating their own solutions. So I don't come in with 12 or 13 consultants to work with a strategic leadership team. I come in with myself, with the belief of that if they're given the time and the space and the right creative frameworks that I help create, that they can solve their own challenges. We shouldn't rob leaders of the ability to create their own breakthroughs. And leaders, in the same turn, should also, enable the people that work for them to create their own breakthroughs. That's what leads to purposeful living, purposeful life, and a highly engaged organization. So I've always believed, no matter how challenging a situation that I come into, and I've been in, I can assure you, dozens, I always believe that the answer or the possibility, the solution is within the capability of that leadership team to solve. And it's like turning the combination so that we can help them discover that. And it's like life too. I mean, we've got everything we need, to be successful. We just have to access that and trust ourselves and to act on it.
Yeah, I think that the whole, in the personal development space, like the whole self-affirmation and trusting yourself, having confidence in ourselves really does help an individual, as they're on this journey of progression, or either developing their career or launching their own business or whatnot. It's a way to believe that it's almost like a resource that we need to tap into more often, and that we already have that confidence. It's just a matter of realizing and registering it. So having that kind of mindset going in and surrounding ourselves with people who can inspire us and empower us, believe in ourselves as well too, that really does help in the notion of self-belief.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I know we're about that time. I just have a few more questions here. When did you consider yourself as a success?
That's a really interesting question. That's a great question. I've never been asked that question before. Let me turn that question slightly, if I may.
Sure.
Let me tell you about the times that I didn't feel successful. And because that might help your listeners maybe catch the flag maybe a little quicker. I didn't feel a success when I compared myself to others. And early in my career, I often looked at others and tried to make comparisons. And two things happened, because each of us is a unique individual. And so I either was like not up to that other person, so that I felt bad, or I thought I was better than that person, which was also a bad feeling. So that I would say that was number one. So I stopped comparing myself to others. I can learn from others, but I don't compare myself to others, because that for me is a fast track to feeling unsuccessful. The second thing, when I don't feel successful, or when I didn't feel successful, was when I thought that I was my work. I built that consulting company that I mentioned, and I was the founder, I was the owner, and people identified me as the CEO, managing director of that company. And for the most part, in 25 years, we had 23 really good years. We had a couple of 2 bad years. And there was a period of time where I thought I was the business, and I didn't separate myself from the business. So that was a situation that was not good for me. So I learned that you're not the work. You're a person. You're different. And the third time, I would say, third situation when I haven't felt successful is when I rely too heavily on the result, when I identify too heavily with the result, and maybe the result wasn't what I intended it to be, but instead of, what I've learned now is to reflect on the process, and what did I learn from the process, and not be so hung up on the results or first place or something like that. So that's how I would answer that question. I think that's perhaps maybe for the listeners something to think about. We all have successes and failures as we go through life. Success for me is where our achievement matches up with our level of fulfillment. And there were just a few situations in my life when I haven't felt that, and those I just described to you.
Yeah, that is great, Dan. Thank you so much for sharing some of those points with us. It really shows that you're someone who's definitely on purpose and have a great self-awareness of who you are and what, where you've come, and the types of impact you've made with your clients and also in your personal life. And so I really do appreciate you sharing your story with us and taking some time. You have a book that's out. Can you tell us more about it? Or was it recently published?
Yeah, it's just hit its first year anniversary, and it's moving quite nicely. It's called Executive Ownershift: Creating Highly Effective Leadership Teams. And the idea behind the book was, I was working with all these leadership teams and making observations and inventing processes and tools to help these leadership teams, create their own breakthroughs. And I said to myself, I was working in Europe, I was working in North America, I was also working in Asia, all different types of teams, sometimes with some similar patterns. So I said, I want to bring all those things, ideas and concepts and stories together in kind of a field book so that I can go back to it. And it was a resource to help me do better work with my clients. And as I started putting all those notes together, I thought, there's probably, clients that I have and maybe some potential clients that would like to have access to all these experiences of leadership teams and how they can drive their own improvement. So then I started thinking that way. And then I started thinking, there's also a lot of consultants and coaches out there that are primarily working with individuals or primarily working with individual leaders. But all those leaders are in a part of a leadership team. So maybe this would be a tool to help them. So in the end, this sort of labor of love, which was just going to be a set of notes for me, so I had quick, easy access, is now a book which is now available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and things like that. And I've written in such a way that you can read it chapter by chapter, whether it's about strategy or running highly effective meetings or creating an ownership culture. You can read it cover to cover, but I do think it's a real pragmatic guide to help leaders and those people that are supporting leadership teams to get a real fast track to success.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, Dan, wishing you all the success now in the future and in the future. Thank you so much for your time with us. Folks, if you enjoyed this podcast, please reach out to Dan and let him know where you discovered him. And until next time, thank you so much for sharing. And Dan, again, thank you. Just quickly, if people wanted to connect with you, where can they find you?
Yeah, thanks, Kong. Well, they can find me on my website. That's www.dannorenberg.com. I'm active on LinkedIn. I really like to engage. I share content regularly. And I also have a YouTube post, Dan Norenberg, on YouTube, which I share really, I think, original, short, sharp content. So if you subscribe to that channel, you'll get access to all the insights, some of the insights that we've talked about here when they come out.
Awesome. Well, folks, there you have it. If you enjoyed this podcast talk, please do go on Apple Podcasts and put a comment and like my content, as well as YouTube and the other various social media outlets. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Kong.